the banking system.
Banking system, yeah.
The riba, meaning people are enslaved to everyone is worried about paying off their mortgages, which is a scam system in itself, meaning house prices.
As we're on the topic of mortgages, I mean, you mentioned mortgages, and I know you've spoken about mortgages in your speeches. What's the real opinion? Now, some ulama have given a fatwa that, yes, it's allowed. One mortgage is allowed, one house is allowed because you need to stay. I mean, I just
some
want
of them have given
that.
Some of them have given a fatwa that buying as many properties as you want, this is promoting capitalism within the Muslims. So what happens? You have a Muslim tycoon who will buy multiple properties, and then what will he do? He will charge tenants extortionate amounts for their rent. This is not the way a Muslim should be, meaning pure capitalism. Migrants who come to the UK or to other countries, a Muslim landlord charging them extortionate rent, mistreating them. So this fatwa is a misguided fatwa. Riba is haram by ijma'. By ijma', it's qat'i in the Quran, meaning riba is haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited riba. So some people say, they quote a passage from the Hanafi books, La riba bayna harbiyin wa muslimin fi dar al-harb. Now, this passage is mentioned in the Hanafi fiqh books, is referring to an active harbi. So these people then say England is Darul Harb, but they enter through a visa and passports, which is entails that we are musta'min, we are entering with what? With security.
Yeah.
So how can you frame England or these countries that we live in terms of there's no active warfare? Because these books were written hundreds of years ago in a different world context. That world context was where you had a khilafah, there was Darul Khilafah, and anything out of the Darul Khilafah
was Darul
Harb. But it entailed active warfare, because the Darul Khilafah was in active warfare with some of the Durul Harb, some of the countries that were places of war. So there are settler colonial entities, for instance, in the Middle East, where there is active warfare currently. So if a Muslim went there, in the Hanafi school, he finds one of these occupying forces soldiers. Not even a soldier, even a settler, who is settled within the illegal entity, that illegal entity.
Yeah.
This is the Hanafi fatwa. You give him $10 and you say, pay me $100. That's permitted. So that's the actual fatwa. Secondly, some people, they quote As-Sarakhsi's Al-Mabsut. In As-Sarakhsi's Al-Mabsut, he mentions that if you go to Darul Harb, you give 2 gold coins, you give away 2 gold coins in exchange for 1 gold coin. They say, look, this shows that you are allowed to give riba, pay riba, in order to receive a house. They quote this passage from Sarakhsi's Al-Mabsut. The response to that is, if they had any knowledge with regard to currency, they would know that passage is referring to devalued gold coin, that you give 2 devalued gold coins to an active harbi, and you attain the pure gold coin, you are benefiting by taking that. In reference to active Ahlul Harb, like the Hanafi fatwas that mention the selling of alcohol in Darul Harb. Those fatwas are referring to, for instance, if you were in the illegal occupying entity that we have today in the Middle East, and to one of those active harbis, you actually sold some commodities and you made money from them, which is benefiting you and harming them, because alcohol was seen as something harming them, that would be permitted. It's not referring to entering a country where you are living with a visa or a passport and you actively then sell alcohol. Na'udhu billah. That's a misguided interpretation. Now, these people are very strict on the size of people's beards, but very lenient on a riba, or photography and video. But they are lenient on riba, which makes no sense, because a riba is something clearly prohibited in the Quran and Sunnah. So
those people who say that you're allowed and you are entitled to 1 property on riba, on a mortgage,
that's based on a different reasoning. So that's based upon a darura or al-haja. Is there an actual darura? Well, if you have a council house, there is no darura. If you have land and property in Pakistan or another country, Bangladesh or wherever you come from originally, then there is no darura. So the darura is case specific. Darura would be Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin, rahimahullah, the most foremost hadith scholar of recent times and Hanafi jurist. He said darura here would be that if you were forced to live in a tent outside on the road. In this day and age, they have these homes, shelters. If you end up in a shelter and you need a home, then of course, and the darura is according to the size of the house also. So how can you have a palace that you pay through riba and then refer to that as a darura? That is not a darura, meaning a man has a palace, he pays through riba. So this proliferation of riba is one of the ashratu sa'ah, which is undermined. In fact, I went to Malawi. When I went to Malawi, they asked me about riba, and I said it's haram. And the chairman of the masjid commended me. He said, we have so many ulama coming from these various other countries. They've never told the Indian community that lives in Malawi that taking bank loans with interest is haram. They've never informed them of that.
So not only does it apply to homes, but it applies to cars on lease and on finance, on all of this. I mean, as you mentioned, and rightly so, when you say that they are being tortured. Now, this is one of the forms of torture, that they are cornering you into a system, the Dajjalic system, as you mentioned rightly so in the book, and you've covered it today in the topic also, that people are being coerced into a corner of riba, of financial burden that's not, as you mentioned, darura. It's not a necessity, but it's because they want to be a part of that system, or they feel that they need to be a part of that system, they're being forced into it.
So the Quran states, الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَى, those who consume riba, لَا يَقُومُونَ, they do not stand up, إِلَّا كَمَا يَقُومُ الَّذِي, except like the one who stands, يَتَخَبَّطُهُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ, the one who is touched by shaitan. You go to the London Underground, you see how people 9 to 5, how their minds are affected in order just to pay off mortgages. These muftis who give this fatwa, they do not realize how damaging riba is. In England, how many homes are repossessed because people are unable to keep up with their payments?
Exactly. Yeah.
Thousands of homes are repossessed, so people lose their homes. They pay tens and thousands of pounds as payments, and then they are unable to keep up the payments because they lose their jobs because of extraneous factors like COVID-19 or other factors due to which they lose their job, and they lose their payments, they lose their homes. So this fatwa actually damages people. It harms them in the long run. They lose money. They may think that Muslims are benefiting because many of us have support systems, meaning within our families, but not everyone has this anymore. There are many Muslims who do not have a support system, and non-Muslims who are harmed by a riba. A riba harms Muslims and non-Muslims.
One of the signs that you've also mentioned